Thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. I get asked all the time what camera you should buy as someone that's starting to take cinematography more serious. But honestly, that's a really hard question to answer because it seems like there's a camera coming out every 3 weeks. And honestly, I wouldn't buy any of them.
I'm in a turtleneck, the fireplace is going, we got new hats, it's spooky season.
But first, let's talk about the ideal specs of your first cinema camera. First off, I'd recommend a camera that has a decent dynamic range, preferably 13 stops or above. You're gonna want some good frame rate options, 24, 30, 48 frames per second at least, preferably 60 if you can get it. You don't want anything too big, that way you can accessorize it easily and cheaply. And then you want a camera that doesn't cost too much money. So don't mosey down in the comments and tell me that the Sony a7S III is the best camera to buy right now, because there's another camera out there that gives you better bang for the buck. Of course, I'm talking about the Blackmagic Pocket 6K. Now the reason I'm talking about a camera that is almost 2 years old now is because it still has the best specs for the money. It's the one that I would recommend to anyone that's trying to get more serious about cinematography right now. Now there's a lot of mirrorless cameras out there that are well spec'd and they have autofocus, and a lot of people are leaning more into those systems. The reason I don't usually want to just get a mirrorless camera is because they're not video focused first. I mean, the Blackmagic Pocket 6K is only $2,000, so it's hard to really call it a cinema camera, but it does have cinema camera in the name. That's because Blackmagic is going all in on the video side of this camera. This is not a photography camera as well. And with that comes a lot of amazing specs. We have 13 plus stops of dynamic range. The camera can shoot up to 50 frames per second in 6K, which is a pretty big feat given that not very many 6K cameras are out there right now, and definitely none of them that can shoot at that frame rate. I don't think even the Komodo can do that. The body of the Komodo costs $6,000. But of course the camera does have many higher frame rate options, but it's going to crop in on that sensor, or you're going to need to shoot in ProRes in order to get those higher frame rate options and get the full frame of the sensor. Which is fine for me as a compromise because this camera only costs $2,000. So think about that going forward when I talk about the pros and cons of this camera. Now I've made videos over a lot of cameras in the past, so of course I get DMs all the time asking about these cameras and which one is better compared to each other. I get a lot of questions about the Z-Cam bodies, but I don't really like the Z-Cam cameras because they have that weird audio issue when it comes to 15 minutes of recording. The raw workflow still isn't very good. You basically just have to shoot in ProRes 422. So for a camera that totes all these high specs but limits you to ProRes 422, that's kind of a bummer for me. Especially when like the full frame versions are obviously a lot more money than the Pocket 6K, which is only $2,000, whereas the Z-Cam F6 costs $4,000. And it doesn't even have a screen on it to be able to look at the image right out of the box. Then of course there's the higher end cameras. There's something a little bit more expensive like the Sony a7S III, which does have a high dynamic range. It's full frame. It can do 16-bit linear out of the HDMI port, which is basically the same as the 12-bit log that comes out of this camera, but this one shoots RAW internally. A7S III, you have to buy a recorder. The camera's already $3,500, and then you put a recorder on it. You're already up to $4,000 to get that camera in a competitive level when it comes to color and bitrate to the Pocket 6K. Now the Pocket 6K doesn't have a full frame sensor, but we've talked about this a lot on the channel. I love the full frame look. It's really nice for like commercial stuff when you want a really unique look, but for when it comes to cinema and you're trying to make something like a short film or narrative or any commercial work, you do not need that full frame look. It's really just a matter of preference. And if you really want to get crazy, why don't we just compare it to the leading industry camera sensor, the Arri Alexa sensor. Right now we've got a $50,000 Arri mirror sitting next to the Pocket 6K. Now maybe the Arri mirror looks a little bit better, but the Pocket 6K only costs $2,000, so who cares? So that's why I keep going back to the Blackmagic Pocket 6K. Now why I'm choosing the Pocket 6K over the 4K is because I don't really want to mess with the speed booster anymore. I don't want to deal with that micro four thirds sensor and what comes with it. Also, the color shift on it is a big bummer. Of course you can fix that color shift, you can deal with it. But with the Pocket 6K right out of the box, you put a lens on it, put a battery in it, a card in it. You're shooting really nice, beautiful images with a really nice color space. And 6K, I mean, a little bit more resolution is nice. I've never really cared about resolution, but it hasn't really hindered the camera at all. When I'm shooting in B-RAW, I'm shooting in constant quality Q5. You know, the file sizes are not very big, and you get all the RAW capabilities that you would want from any other RAW camera. It works natively inside DaVinci, which is what I use to edit DaVinci Resolve, but it also has a plugin now for Premiere Pro. So it's really, to me, the best all-around camera you can buy right now, even though it's almost 2 years old. There's a new camera coming out all the time. This camera still, in my opinion, trumps all of them. And that's not just from like the specs, but from the image quality. The image just looks really nice. There's something a little bit more filmic about it than there is on the other cameras. Some of those other cameras just look a little digital to me. Of course, there's some downsides to the camera. The battery life is not very good, so it's helpful to have a lot more batteries with it, or to build it out in a cinema style and put a V-mount battery on the back of it. I do like the touchscreen on the back quite a bit, but it is kind of in a weird placement when you do start to rig out the camera. So if you do put a V-mount battery on the back, it's hard to get to the controls on the back if you don't have your V-mount mounted flat. Of course, there is dials and buttons on this camera that you can pre-program to access controls a little bit easier. So at the end of the day, it's really not that big of a deal, but it would be nice if you could have a flip out screen that you could adjust the settings from on top of the camera body. It is a little bit weird of a form factor. It's kind of wide, which makes it harder to put on gimbals and stuff like that. But I did recently use this as a B cam on a documentary I was shooting, where I was shooting with the Area Mira, and I use this as a B camera just to throw it on a Ronin on a gimbal to get some kind of running shots that I needed to get, and it worked out really well. Now the preamps on the audio are not amazing on this camera, but it does have the mini XLR input on there with phantom power, which is nice. It has a full HDMI port. You can power the camera very easily using the power outlet on the side of it, and you have full access to your audio controls internally. But I don't want to go down all the specs on that. I really just want to talk about the image quality and what you're getting for $2,000. If you're trying to take cinematography more seriously, maybe you're trying to do it as your career, this camera's gonna pay itself off so fast. I don't care if you're charging just a few $100s a day or all the way up to like $1,000 a day, this camera's gonna give you a really nice image quality. You're gonna be able to bill for this camera and it's gonna pay itself off so fast. And also, you're just getting started, right? So for $2,000, you also would need editing software, and this camera comes with DaVinci Resolve Studio, which is one of the most powerful color grading programs they make, and also it's an editing platform. So you don't have to go out and buy any other software. If you're just now getting into things and you're wanting to take things seriously, this is a great package to buy because it just does everything out of the box. So I recently purchased this camera to do more of this content creation because it's such an easy and versatile camera to use in the studio. Right now I have it completely rigged up on a tripod with a remote follow focus and a monitor and a wireless system and a microphone and a V-mount battery, and it's all being powered by the V-mount battery, of course. But then I have the small rig cage, which has a quick release on it, so I can quickly just pull out the cables. I can hit a quick release on there and I can pull the camera out and I can go just using the body and lens alone. Because it has that internal battery, you can basically just take it off of the studio unit and just start using it to get quick B-roll shots in a small form factor. And that's why I bought this camera for my own use. But something to be said is you can go quickly into a studio setup with it and then pull it off and just go handheld and still get a really nice image. Also, this camera is really good in low light. It has a dual native ISO, so once you get to 1250 ISO, you're changing that gain on that sensor, and now you can basically just shoot in the dark. I just wanted to make this video because I just get DMs all the time asking me how to start out as a cinematographer and what camera I should buy. And there's always a list of cameras that come into the DMs, but I just want to say right now that in 2020, still after 2 years, I'd recommend getting the Blackmagic Pocket 6K, and I probably will still recommend that until Blackmagic comes out with a full frame version of this camera that's competitively priced. If it's cheaper than the A7S III, I'm still gonna recommend that over the A7S III. There's just a lot more I would recommend spending your money on than a $5,000 camera in 2020. Actually, that kind of brings me to the sponsor of this video, which is Skillshare. Now, Skillshare you can invest in yourself rather than investing in gear. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people. Explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity. There are actually quite a few topics on Skillshare worth checking out, but I think the ones that would probably pertain to you most would be the film and video section, which actually features my friends over at Moment, Caleb Babcock and Niles Gray, who do a class over iPhone filmmaking. But I decided to take a class called Mastering Illustration, Sketching, Inking, and Color Essentials by Josiah Brooks. And that's because recently I was working on this documentary and I was filming a muralist, an artist, and I was really inspired by what he was doing, and that kind of spurred this interest for me to look outside the traditional mediums for inspiration. Now, usually I'm just looking for my inspiration from film, but I thought maybe looking outside of this and looking into other art might help spur up some creativity for me. So when I was looking through the mini classes that are on Skillshare, I found one that was about illustration. I remember when I was a kid, I actually drew a lot, and that was kind of the place where I used to make my art as a child, but I've stopped doing that for quite a long time now. So I just started watching this class to see what I would learn from it, but then there was a section where he started talking about your color palette. And basically what he said was to start with the color palette that first comes to mind, basically so you could just throw it away and think outside the box. And I just thought that was something I could apply to my images. You know, I could start with a basic lighting setup and find a color palette that first comes to mind, and then stop, take a second, rethink it, refine it, and make it better. So Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, meaning there are no ads, and they're always launching new premium classes so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. And it's all for less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. So if you're curious about this, the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership so you can explore your creativity. Thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. So if you like this video, definitely give me a thumbs up. That goes a long way on the channel. And if you love this video, subscribe to the channel so you can see more content like this in the future. Until next time, guys, I'm Spencer Sakurai. See ya.